Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be. And to thank you very much for joining us today for the fourth in our seminar series. So today we have the distinguished privilege of having with us Dr. Abdel-Fatau Musah, who's going to be speaking to us about the evolving asymmetric threat environment in Africa, implications for good governance, social cohesion, and sovereignty. Okay, and we also have the immense pleasure of having Leonide with us, who's a program manager within CODESRIA as well. She's going to be serving as discussant for this seminar. Okay, so before I begin, let me just say a few words about our speaker here. So Dr. Musah is currently the director of the West African Division of the Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations at the United Nations headquarters in New York. In his current role, he backstops the UN special political and peacekeeping missions, as well as broader peace and security engagements in West Africa and in the Sahel. Before assuming this role, he served as director of Africa 2, so that's North, Central, and West Africa in the Department of Political Affairs, having previously held the position of Deputy Head of Office and Director of Political Affairs and Good Offices at the UN at the UN United Nations Office to the African Union in Addis. I think I should also say Dr. Musah is the architect of the ECOWAS conflict prevention framework. And there he facilitated the establishment of the ECOWAS electoral assistance and mediation facilitation divisions. And he's the author of several publications, including Mercenaries and African Security Dilemma. I also want to say we are especially proud, especially pleased, because Dr. Musah was the chair of the African Leadership Center's Board of Trustees as well. There's no longer in that role at the moment, but we've had the privilege of having him serve in that role for us. So let me pause here and I'll introduce Leonide to all of you when we come to her moment to sort of discuss the presentation that comes from Dr. Musah. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. As we begin the presentation, as we go on, if questions come to you, do please feel free to put those down in the relevant tab here on Zoom. Thanks so much. Dr. Musah, please, over to you.
No, Dr. Ipe, thanks so much for having me. It's a real privilege, really, to once again have this opportunity to address the African Leadership Center community, and of course our broader African community. And I want also to thank Dr. Fumi Olonisakin. I know she's on here, and to thank all of you for all the marvelous work that you are doing at the African Leadership Center. That is what we really, need. And, I think I wish also to welcome Leonide. I think she will bring in perspectives, to this meeting, particularly on the situations in the Sahel, and things like that. Okay, just to begin with, I must say, that my presentation is just supposed to throw up a lot of questions, a lot of issues that will allow us to have, something like a structured discussion on the evolving asymmetric threat environment in Africa and its implications for good governance, social cohesion, and sovereignty, in our continent. I think terrorism and violent extremism have become something like, the go-to topic today when we are talking about, the continent. And I want to begin with two quotes that actually launch us into this. And the first one is by Calvin Clausewitz, who, famously, said war is the continuation of politics by other means. I think it's very apt in the discussion that we are going to have today. And when we are talking about the asymmetric environment, I think Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State of the U.S., also made a very pertinent observation, saying, that the guerrilla wins if it does not lose. And guerrilla in the Spanish, this is like a small army. The guerrilla wins if it does not lose. The conventional army loses if it does not win. And that actually encapsulates what we are seeing across the continent today. So having said that, just for definitional purposes, let me just see what is asymmetric warfare, and then, of course, its evolution in Africa. It is basically a warfare between opposing forces which differ vastly in their military power, and that typically involves the use of unconventional weapons and tactics to pursue political or economic strategies. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is how I would describe it. And in the African context, we've had a lot right from the independence struggle. You can, talk about the MPLA, Frelimo, FNLA, the Mau, in Kenya and others. All, these are just examples where this asymmetric warfare was put into perspective. There have been also local insurgencies and the transformation of local self-defense groups like the Kamajors in the Sierra Leone and other places, the Dozos that we have seen also in some of the countries. Today we are looking at Kogwego in Burkina Faso. We've got the Asafo companies in Ghana and other places. Ulemo has transformed also in Guinea. Today is one of the main, forces that we have. When you are going, when you go deeper into the African continent, you've got the Banyamulenge, the M23, which was very much linked to them, the Kamwena in Sapu of the Kasai group, the Mai and others who are up till today very much part of the conflict environment in the DRC and beyond. And you've got the quasi-terrorist groups, particularly during the Cold War and even beyond. People know of the Red Brigade in Italy. You've got PLO and the famous attack against the Israeli contingent at the Munich Olympic Games, for example. These were also like terrorist activities, but aiming at political outcome and then trying to put that message out there for the world to know of the presence of these groups. And then we've got today what we can, call the auxiliary armed groups, which have been used often by colonial and then African powers. You can remember the covert and the 32 battalion during the apartheid era in South Africa that was used to try to exterminate opponents in and around South Africa. You've got the French who have used the Legionnaire for years. The Legionnaire being military service that is a pathway to French nationality for several people who are not of French nationality. You've got the Grecas that the British have used in several conflicts around the world. And most recently, you might have heard about Gaddafi's the African Legion that actually housed a lot of the groups that eventually came back into Mali, the MNLA, to start that insurrection in that, country. So those are some of them. And of course, the use of mercenaries all across Africa. We know that they were the major tool used to overthrow governments that some powers did not like, and also for local activities, interventions, and other things in several of the African conflict environment. But what has transformed the situation now is what I'm going to talk about, and that is the post-Cold War the environment of multipolarism and then attempts at redrawing borders in the world. These are some of the factors that the post-Cold War actually threw up in the world, and it was characterized by local insurgencies for change. You saw across Africa, Mano River Basin, and all that, all for profit. You have MPFL, Ulimbo, and others in Sierra Leone and others. And what brought all these things about is that the post-Cold War also launched a very dangerous phase in armaments in the country, that the deregularization of the military-industrial complex, particularly in the former Soviet Empire, which have become a major enabler in the work today. So today, when we are talking about the environment, one factor that has actually allowed asymmetric warfare to flourish is this deregularization and the democratization of sophisticated tools of coercion. You are talking about the use of drones by terrorist groups, the go-to weapon, that is the IEDs, improvised explosive devices, across the continent, artificial intelligence, which has also driven asymmetric warfare, or what they call the ADAW and all that. And then the digital information warfare that we are seeing, that the weaponization of internet platforms, internet trolls, and other that have added a spice to what we are seeing today. And if you look at it, the transformation also has seen mercenaries transforming and morphing into what we call the private military companies or contractors. When you are talking about Afghanistan, when you are talking about Iraq and other places, when you talk about the regular intervention forces from the West, they always have the word contractors, which is an euphemism for mercenaries, for contractors and others around the world that have been used as auxiliary forces for these companies. The US, the UK, and others have all deployed these forces. And I must say that the Southern Africa region, particularly South Africa, has been a major contributor of these contractors in many of these, crises far away from the African continent. And of course, you've got the newly resurgent countries like China and then, Russia, who also use these auxiliary forces. You've heard of the little green men, in the Crimea, and then, Crimea and other places. And today, we are also hearing about the little blue men who are, the Chinese, sort of maritime militias that have been used in the South China Sea. It has not reached Africa yet, but as China also makes inroads into Africa, don't forget that these little blue men used in that place can become very effective. And the Russians are also using the tactics the West has used in the past. You must have heard about Zhigozhin, a very close ally of Putin and his, company, the Wagner Group, and their role in places like Syria, in places like Libya, today, and also in the Central African Republic. Okay, so these are auxiliary forces for some of these, groups, so countries, the powers in the world, and it is important to, have that. So that has been one of the main enabling environment. But the process of decay begins actually from the head, that is at home, as far as Africa is concerned. And it is governance deficits and then the impact of, the issues like the climate change, the breakdown of the social contract between the people and their states that have also served as an enabling environment. As we have seen, this asymmetric warfare evolving in Africa, many countries, whether you are talking about Burkina Faso, whether you are talking about Mali, you are talking about Nigeria, you are talking about Niger, the process we are seeing is that the national armies are abandoning the periphery and then concentrating in super camps, leaving the periphery open to the influence of jihadi forces that we've seen all across in Africa. And alongside that, these countries have also been instrumentalizing the local self-defense group that I mentioned before into auxiliary armies for the national army to defend them in the periphery. The Colwego in Burkina Faso have been transformed into the volunteers for the defense of the fatherland, for example. Over in Burkina Faso, in Nigeria, we hear about the civilian task force, which is also nothing more than government-sponsored local groups for self-defense in their countries. The impact of that we will, come to a bit, later on. So the abandonment of the periphery is, and then the retreat into super camps across these countries have allowed the entire periphery of our countries at the mercy, I put them at the mercy of jihadists and other, forces with all the implications, that brings. And then, of course, the arming of the self-defense group that we have talked about, the civilian task force in Nigeria, the Colwego to volunteer for the defense of the fatherland. You go to Mali today, a sub-state war is actually going on, very ethnicized among the Dogon, led by Dana Ambassador, for example, against the Pearl Fulani groups in Mopti and S. Environs in central Mali, and others. So, and many of them have been accused as either being auxiliaries of national armies based on ethnicity, and that also opens the door to manipulation by jihadist forces across the country. So those are those enabling environment that I am talking about, why we have the situation that we have today. And in that crack is where we have the Islamic State and then the Al-Qaeda franchise. Franchise in the world. Islamic State itself emerged from Al-Qaeda, and today there are local war between the two franchises towards either bringing them together again by force or for territory and for trade routes. So if you look at Africa today, and I wanted to share to share a document here, a file that I prepared. Look, this is something like the strategic goal of Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State somewhere around 2010, 2012, what their vision was, and all the places, colored black, whether you are talking about Khorasan, whether you are talking about Hua, the Maghreb, and then the land of Nabasha toward the south. You see that about half of Africa have been targeted by the Islamic State franchise, Al-Qaeda franchise, as territories that must become the Islamic Caliphate in Africa. And today, we are seeing that The whole continent is actually surrounded. So it is not only the northern part of Africa, but the south as well. We've got Al-Shabaab, which is, still operating in Somalia. We've got Al-Shabaab in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, that is to the south. Of Africa. You have got the Allied Democratic Forces, who are also allied to the Islamic State, who are operating in the DRC. You've got the Boko Haram franchise, whether it is JAS or ISWAP, that are also fighting in the Lake Chad Basin. You are talking about Chad, Nigeria, Niger, and the, surrounding areas, Cameroon. Also going south. And then you have the broader Sahel, where you have Jenin and the Islamic State in the greater Sahel, who are also holding sway. And today, all these groups are probing the borders. Cote d'Ivoire has already been attacked along the border with Burkina Faso several times. Ghana, all the coastal countries of West Africa are being targeted. So the continent is actually encircled by, these forces. And what has been the response of Africa? And it is to go back to history and call on the former colonial powers to come and save us again. And that is what we are seeing in the Sahel. That is the call of desperation that we are hearing from a number of our heads of state, for these foreign powers to come and help us to, conquer these, the Al-Qaeda Islamic State franchises in Africa. This is what we are seeing. Right now, as far as the continent is, concerned, but if reality is to dawn on Africans, the U.S. is already withdrawing from Afghanistan, having spent, almost 2 decades or so, there without any success. The same thing is happening in Iraq, Libya. We are seeing what is happening there. Meaning, and this brings me back to the quote that you cannot even decapitate terrorist groups by eliminating their leaders in targeted attacks or anything like that, because these groups have become very established. They are organized like a state. They control territory. They control the economy. Where they occupy, they have got their own culture, their own civilization. At times, this bastardized Islamist theory, to use as their ideology in many of these countries. So these terrorist groups, Islamic State and then the Al-Qaeda franchise, are actually organized along with burial lines, controlling territory, controlling army, the economy, and then they have an ideology. These are the characteristics of a modern state. Whereas these groups are actually beyond the radar of international norms. And that adds another spice, because there is no way you can use institutions like the UN, the African Union, or anything like that to bring them to book, because they only control virtual states and not, physical states that are part of the international, order. And I think that is something that is worth, knowing as we move forward. And so, how have they, used it? In fact, this map also speaks to it. The terrorist groups have got a very long-term strategy. Right now, what we are seeing in Africa is that as the national armies are withdrawing from the periphery, these terrorist groups are occupying either using the tested carrot and stick. They say that, listen, we are replacing the state here. We are here to help you. We are here to, because the state has abandoned you. Or they use force. Thirdly, they use also instrumentalization of ethnicity, religion, and that has also added spice to a lot of the intercommunal violence that we are seeing, whether it is the Dogon and the Pearls in broader Sahel, broadly speaking. You've heard about the farmer herder crisis across Africa, intercommunal violence, and then all that. These things, these communities have lived in peace for centuries. What has caused them to become, today enemies in their own, on their own land is also the instrumentalization of identity. Who is Muslim, who is not Muslim, who is Dogon, who is not Dogon, who is a farmer, who is a herder, and things like, and that has actually divided the communities. And because in terms of the asymmetric balance of forces between these local communities and the Al-Qaeda group, there is no match actually for them. So many of them acquiesce, they adapt, and they are there. So what we are seeing is that most of our countries do not control the periphery in the continent today, and then these terrorist groups are actually filling that gap and as a basis for them to expand their control, and that is a strategy that we have to adapt in our currently. And and then those who are supposed to come and save us, many of them are also using auxiliary forces. In Central Africa today, there is an undeclared war between France and Russia over the control of what is Central African Republic. And that is also impacting Central Africa and Chad, their, relations. This is an undeclared war, that is there for control of over resources and of influence in this country. So that is something also that we have to look at. And we have to remember also that a country like Chad, right, France itself has never seen Chad as a place for resource exploitation. In fact, the oil resources in Chad are actually exploited by companies other than French companies. For France, Chad is an auxiliary army. It is a large military garrison, that has been used. So Chad's main, influence is power. It projects power through its military diplomacy. And that is what happened after the death of Déby, and the dynamics, the AU attitude to Chad and the AU and ECOWAS attitude to Mali is actually can be determined by this. What happened in Chad, a small country of about 16 million people, with but having an oversized army, 40 to 50,000, with about 200 generals, compared to huge countries like Nigeria with about 250 million, and you are talking about, an army of about 150, 160,000. You can see the disparity. So the military diplomacy has been one of the factors that is also allowing, for example, General Goita to reseize power in Mali and saying that, listen, if Muhammad Kaka can be allowed, to assume power after the death of his father, what moral right have you got to tell the military in Mali, to hand over to civilians in the transition period? That is something, that we need, actually to discuss here going forward. And the French-Russian dynamics in the region is very critical. General Goita himself had his training in Russia, and the fear is that he is drifting more toward the Russians and others. So Africa is gradually also becoming an arena of a superpower contest, on the continent, what we saw during the Cold War. So history is repeating itself, and this is something that, we have to, look at very, very, carefully. But for now, our communities who have been abandoned by the countries are, of course, making use of their coping mechanisms, the coping mechanism that they have. One of them, protection, has become a commodity, whether it is about local militias or by terrorist groups. That protection, that whose responsibility the state has relinquished, to these groups, puts the local communities at the mercy of these groups, and they have to adapt, to that situation. One, where some of the things they've used is through accommodation and opposition, silent opposition, and then also accommodation because of the disparate power that they have vis-a-vis those who are armed and are controlling, the territory. And so it is either to the self-defense groups or to the terrorist groups. And it is like between the devil and the deep blue sea. And these have to cope, with that. The other is their acquiescence, that's what I thought, and then to adapt to the situation. Also, waiting long term, just like the terrorist group, for a period, also to opportunities to strike back. This is what we are having today in much of the African states that we have. The communities do not have the power to resist. They acquiesce, they adapt, but that does not mean, that they accept what they are doing. The recent killing of about 160 people in Solhan, a village, community in the north of Burkina Faso, is actually a prime example of that. The information available, to us is that Jenin and the Islamic State franchises attack them, because these so-called volunteers for the defense of the fatherland have become the ears and the eyes of the government, reporting about the movement. We've seen that also in Nigeria and other places. So these are reprisal attacks against them, worsened by the fact that the government was taking measures to sort of deprive these jihadist groups of the economic territory they control. For example, the artisanal mines of gold and other things. And it was no surprise that the attacks in Solhan occurred, just after the government had declared those artisanal areas a no-go zone and trying to reinforce them. So it is about their economic survival, the jihadist groups, and a fight also with the local self-defense groups, who they accuse often as being, something like informants to the government and others. This is what we are seeing, on the continent. Those are the threats, that Africa is facing. We are gradually being surrounded by terrorist groups, and others all across north, south, east, and west. And today, if you look at what is happening in Libya, there is a peace process that is going on there. And then one of the key demands in the peace process is that all foreign fighters and mercenaries must leave Libya. And we shouldn't forget, in 2012, it was the killing of Gaddafi that unleashed the MNLA into the northern part of Mali, that has actually blossomed into what we have today, where the whole of the north of Mali has become a no-go zone, to government forces, and then these forces are even stretching their influence to the center of Mali, Mopti and other places, and even moving toward the capital, Bamako, today, from the point that they were before. And today, if foreign forces are supposed to leave Libya, and then the attack in Chad, for example, by FARC, well, the FARC was actually in southern parts of Libya, supporting General Haftar's forces in that place, the age-old ethnic rivalry, between the Zagara, in Chad, and then the Tubu, who also straddle the two borders. And it is the pressure for external forces to leave, Libya. That was the spark to what happened in in Chad not very long ago. So today, if these foreign forces are going to leave, because they've all acted as mercenaries to one force or the other, whether it is the Turks, the Russians, the Wagner group, another thing, and then the various armed groups from Darfur, from Chad, who are also fighting as mercenaries in the war in Libya. So if they are to leave, where do they go? Because the EU has made sure it has sealed the Mediterranean. So the only way they can move is towards the south. And that is going to add a spice, to what is happening in the Sahel, what is happening in the Lake Chad Basin and others. And this is something that we have to watch. So these are just a few points. And I don't think I'll be able to conclude without throwing some of the options for us going forward. And one of them that is clearly, one factor that is clearly missing in Africa today is the political will, leadership and political will, because we have seen in places, even the most powerful armies are helpless trying to stop the jihadist movement. It's only local forces with local knowledge and other things who are capable. But unlike in the immediate post-Cold War period, today, under the so-called liberal democracy, nobody is ready to commit resources to fight. That leadership is lacking in many of the African countries. Everybody's trying to protect themselves, but the terrorist threat is regional. So trying to link those two has become a major failure of government. Where even there have been the coalition of the willing, like the group of 5 in the Sahel, that brings together, Mali, Mauritania, Chad, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These are a coalition of countries that are resource strapped, and they are dependent on external forces to help them, to fight them. Because nobody is ready to commit their own resources, towards, that. And once that is the situation, then you are at the mercy of the one who you are inviting to protect you. And this is what we have seen about the helplessness of the G5 Sahel force, which is calling for a Chapter 7 UN mandate, which will come with resources. And some of the Security Council members are saying, look, G5 Sahel is not does not report to the Security Council, and we are not going to do it. So we have G5 Sahel, which is there a bit helpless as it is. We've got, the multinational joint task force in the Lake Chad Basin, at least, which is becoming more and more independent, because at least you've got some powerful states, resource leading states in the in the Lake Chad Basin. In particular Nigeria and Cameroon, so they can actually fund a lot of it. So you don't hear much of MNJTF going to ask for resources, but their impact have been very limited, because instead of a regional approach, everybody is trying to protect their territory, whereas the jihadist networks are actually networking across the entire continent and others. So there is a deficit in terms of what the member states can do. So the leadership becomes very, very important, and for the leaders to recognize that the existential nature of the terrorist threat today that we face, and their commitment, to actually commit adequate resources for that purpose is lacking on the continent today. The second main issue is their inability to appreciate that the threat goes beyond national borders, and that a commitment to regional responses, building regional coalitions, and supporting them with adequate, resources while ensuring vigilance nationally is the way to go. Thinking regionally and at times acting, locally. So this is what we have to think about, and then confronting the threat at the weakest, at the weak links of the counter-terrorism efforts. Okay, the weak links. Today, when you look at the Sahel, for example, Burkina Faso has become the last barrier, the dam, which when it bursts, the whole of the coastal countries are going to be inundated by terrorists. But today, what we are seeing is bilateral arrangements. Either Ghana, Burkina Faso trying to control their borders, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso trying to control their common border, but no regional approach. The ECOWAS have come up with a plan of action on counter-terrorism, but it is yet to be operationalized at a regional level. And to fight the canker at the source will require concentrating forces in a place like Burkina Faso, which, if it's not controlled, is going to spread to the others. Our borders are very porous, and there is no way any country is capable of protecting its common border alone, given the size of these countries. And that is also something that people have to think about. And then, of course, dismantling of transnational organized crime networks and routes across Africa is also a major thing, because terrorism feeds itself through the traditional, transnational crime routes, networks, along the continent. They have fused into one, and that is a funding mechanism for this terrorist group. So looking at that also becomes very, very important, trying to dismantle them. And of course, rescuing the periphery and rebuilding the social contract in our countries. And we are talking about, communities that have been abandoned with a broken social contract. And that is also something because that is the fertile ground for terrorism, extremism to thrive, when they are abandoned. So the return of the state to this periphery, and then the provision of basic services, and also reintegrating the young people in these communities into an inclusive economic agenda, in the country is also very important. And of course, we cannot also look at this regional approach without looking at the role of the African Union and the ECOWAS and then the other sub-regional organizations. It is noteworthy that SADC has decided to deploy a force, a regional force in Mozambique to fight the Al-Shabaab, franchise over there. And, what are the others doing? We have G5, MIJTF. Meanwhile, a regional organization like ECOWAS exists, and also the African Union. For the past 2-3 years, the EU has said it is deploying about 3 battalions into the Litako-Gourma region of the Sahel. That is the tri-border region between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. But up till now, that has not materialized. It is still on paper. So the regional organizations have to step up to the plate. That is the next. The third main issue that I would want to highlight is the need also to rebuild the social contract at the national and then the local levels. I've hinted at it before. That is the depoliticization of the threat. Because today, if you go to Nigeria, you go to Burkina, you go to Mali, politicians are using the threat as a way, their capture of power. So it has been politicized and further dividing the communities, because they don't see it as a common threat that can consume all of them. And so the need to depoliticize that threat, which is existential to the continent, is very, very important. And then the re-establishment of the state at the periphery, I've mentioned before, fighting impunity. Because the use of these self-defense groups with about 2 weeks, 1 month training maximum is a recipe for disaster. It is about accountability, it is about fighting impunity, and if you do not do that, then you lose the trust of the communities. And then these groups are more and more being seen as auxiliary forces of the state. So the crime that they commit also are attributed to the state. And that, the whole issue of accountability also, comes here. And then, of course, repairing the local infrastructures for peace. What has happened to our traditional conflict resolution mechanisms? We have to go back, to a building local infrastructures for peace, together with the economic empowerment, something like a formula that can reverse the trend that we are seeing today. And of course, promoting inclusive development, integrating the youth, and then extending opportunities to them. It is also something within the power of the states, but the political will is not there to commit the requisite resources toward that end, and that is a major problem. And for many of our young researchers who are listening to this, it is also about our ability to be able to study, project, and then to advise on how to deal with some of these existential threats that we are talking about, like the asymmetric warfare that I've just mentioned. And what do they include? Like, what is our ability as think tanks, research organizations, NGOs, and other things to monitor and evaluate the evolutionary trends in asymmetric threat environment globally, and then scanning the global horizon and its implications for Africa. For example, I just mentioned the ongoing Libya peace process. What will be, if it is to succeed, what is going to be the impact on the Sahel and beyond when they say all foreign fighters have to leave and they have only one-way direction that they are going to go? How do you already anticipate that? That is another, main issue. And what will happen in Darfur, in the Chad, Syria dynamics that I also mentioned. What study are we doing to and its implication, an advisory role that we have, and for the implication of that, for example, to Mali, for example, to Nigeria, and other things, what is happening along its border, and things like that. It's also an area for research, and of course, finally, advocacy, messaging, and counter messaging. Because the weaponization of information by these groups also, mean that we have to devise also counter messaging, to them. So how do we frame that in the, modern context? I think these are probably a few of points that going forward I would, want to point out. But, I think this is by way of throwing that subject out there, and then we're ready to take, questions and contributions to enrich, that debate, because we are having this, this talk today because this asymmetric environment, the terrorist, encroachment, on Africa is one of the most existential threats that we face today, probably more dangerous than COVID-19 and others. And the earlier we sort of concentrated minds on trying to make sure that Africa does not become the real base of terrorists, who are being flashed out in other parts of the world, and then finding very fertile ground, in Africa because of the leadership deficit that we have, the very porosity, of our borders, and then the fact that we have abandoned almost all our territories except the capitals. Listen, I think it gives a food for thought going forward. So let me stop here and hand over to Eka, for further discussion. And I'm sure Leonide is also here to add elements to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for that, Dr. Musah. I think everyone will join me in agreeing that that was such an astute, a very in-depth, comprehensive analysis of what is really a complex situation at the moment that has so many implications for the work we do, but also for the spaces in which we are based, in which we're concerned with, spaces that many of us are from as well. So it's a very pertinent subject that we're engaging. And I think, the way that you've gone over this across time periods, giving us the benefit of the wealth of your experience has been hugely, hugely useful, because there's a way we focus on these issues without locating it along a trajectory and recognizing what interlinkages may exist between this period and other periods as well. And also the comprehensive coverage of various parts of the continent, but also locating this conversation about Africa in a wider debate. The map you showed us there to show us it's not just what we're doing here. There is a plan around how Africa fits into something larger. So the way we think about this must be cognizant also of that bigger agenda, that larger picture. This was hugely, hugely valuable. And I look forward to all the comments and the questions that will be coming as a result of this. Before we jump into that, please let me invite our Leonide to join us as discussant. But before then, let me just also offer a few words in terms of introduction here. Leonide is a program manager at the Department of Training, Grants and Fellowships at one of our premier research institutions on the continent, CODESRIA, which is headquartered in Dakar in Senegal. She focuses on higher education programs specifically. Prior to that, she had been assigned to the UN Regional Center for Disarmament in Africa as a visiting research fellow. And it's very key to know that she is, of course, an alumna of the ALC, both as one of our fellows and as a graduate of the MSc program on security leadership and society. Leonide has also been a research associate at the African Leadership Center, of course, prior to this, and she contributed to key projects, including a mapping study of the peace and security terrain in Africa. Her current interests, of course, and this is why she's also here, are on thinking about leadership and political transitions in Francophone Africa, among other contexts. And she's, of course, a research aide to Professor Abdel-Fatau, former special representatives for the Secretary General in Mali. So with that, Leonide, over to you, please. Let's hear a few comments from you following this very rich presentation. Thank you, Leonide.
Thank you very much, Eka. Thank you for inviting me to do this. Prof, thanks so much for that very illuminating and very thought-provoking presentation. Personally, I think you left us with a lot to chew on. And, you just threw a lot of things out there, a lot of things that we've been, thinking about. But one thing that came across very clearly from your presentation is the need to rebuild the social contract, to empower local infrastructures for peace, to promote inclusive development, and depoliticize current responses to the security challenges we have now. Yeah, that's one thing I found very important. And I liked how you emphasized the environment, which continues to enable the asymmetric warfare, which is evolving in Africa right now. Because sometimes this is not really emphasized, because you highlighted things like the democratization of sophisticated armament, which has played a huge part in the conflict that we currently see in the Sahel region. You also mentioned the presence of auxiliaries to national armies, which is today playing a very huge part in the conflict we are seeing in a country like Mali, for example, But most times in our analysis of these conflicts, we sweep those under the carpet as we, we currently bury, everything under the current, the narrative of the war on terror, Yeah, and talking about how, current interventions affect, democracy and sovereignty in Africa. I like how you highlighted the contradictory situation in which, the former colonial master France finds itself in vis-a-vis the situation in Mali and the situation in Chad. You have France on one hand telling the military in Mali to hand over power to the civilian government, and on the other hand, France is sort of like condoning the holding on to power by the military constitution in Chad, because they think of this as an exceptional circumstance in order to maintain peace and ensure that the country is defended in troubled times. This has continued to beg the question, and this is, a conversation which is on the table that, we need to have. So what peace are we building here? On one hand, you're condoning the constitutional holding on to power by the military, and on the other hand, you're asking the military in Mali to hand over power. So whose peace are we building here? Despite the fact that there has been constant fallout in Mali, the coup that took place in August was just testament to the fact that, the community in Mali is very, there's a lot of discontent with the current peace building architecture which is going on there. Yeah, so whilst I was listening to you, one thing that just kept reverberating in my mind is, what are the chances for the futuristic African state?
Mm-hmm.
Given the current peace building approach, what are the chances for this state? Because if there is ever going to be a chance that, these states are going to, to surmount this legitimacy challenge, we need to rebuild the social contracts, which you emphasize, between the state and the population. But current approaches seem to, continue to alienate the society. Like you mentioned, you have, the armies retreating from the frontiers, towards the capital. And, so this is just complicating, the issue of the social contract between the state and the society, which we have been trying to build. So with this kind of situation, what are the stakes for the futuristic African state? The current approach to the security situation in the Sahel has done very little to stem the crisis. It instead continues to expand into new areas. Meanwhile, there's popular frustration with the Sahelian government. If you talk to people in Niger, you talk to people in Mali, a lot of people feel that they are abandoning their local, local exigencies, and the current security approaches are instead targeted at protection of the West. Yeah, so if these countries are ever going to surmount this crisis of legitimacy, then we need to think about that. I think listening to if you talk to people in the Sahel region and right across from the Lake Chad Basin going down to Nigeria, Cameroon, I think one thing that both practitioners and researchers would agree on is that there is the nature of the current states are problematic. But unfortunately, the current approaches seem to prioritize stabilization as opposed to conversations. Yeah, if you look at the current peace building trend, you look at the stabilization mission in Mali, we seem to want to prioritize stabilization. So this stabilization instead seems to be at the expense of peace and state building in the states. So I think those are just some of the things that came out very strongly from your presentation, and some of the things that as thinkers, as researchers, we need to think about as we even begin to imagine what the future should hold for these African states and the way we build peace and the way we think about peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Leonide. I think, again, very valuable addition to that very rich presentation from Dr. Musah, of course. The reflection there on the discontent that, reminding us there are peace building processes going on, perhaps state building processes going on as well, but there's a lot of discontent around many of those processes. And perhaps linked to that is the way in which some of those are organized around, Dr. Musah mentioned a lot of this, are organized around a central objective of protecting those in global north context, those in the West. Dr. Musah mentioned, unfortunately, an approach now that is about going back to the West to address some of these challenges. So in a way, you highlight the cost of doing that. In doing that, it means, what is centered in that? Who's paying for this? Also decide what the priorities might be, in that regard. And the point you make, of course, and Dr. Musah brought us to this at the end, about the future. Right, so we're talking about all of this, but Dr. Musah shared with us the fact that this is part of a larger plan. It's not just about our space or our continent, it is part of a larger agenda. So our thinking cannot pause here. It has to be projecting, looking forward. And the ALC, of course, has this sort of future peace research cluster that's trying to ask these questions, and something that came up quite a bit in Dr. Musah's presentation, there is the place of young people, the place of youth. So if we're talking about futures, and I think this research cluster, that is a lot of what this work centers around. Who has to be sitting, making the decisions? Who has to be sitting there conceptualizing some of these issues? It has to be those that should be in leadership now, but will certainly be in leadership at that time. So the point that's being made here about our role, as a community, as an academic, as a knowledge community, let me put it this way, as a knowledge community, and what voices are being projected, but also how we are engaging this space and thinking beyond. I mean, the producing creation of knowledge is critical, but to what use, right? What is the use? What is the impact of that knowledge going to be? And thinking about that ahead of time should inform how we carry out this exercise. And part of that would include actually who is part of carrying out this exercise, who is part of this research activity, who is part of this knowledge creation, what language are we using for this, and who's contributing to all of that, whose voices are we elevating here. Thank you very much for that, Leonide. Thank you very much, Dr. Musah. Colleagues, please, the floor is very open to get comments from you, contributions, comments, questions, contributions. You can put them in the chat. If you would like to, I hope I can manage it, but if you would like to speak, I can also, if you raise your hand, I will try to make sure I can see you. Let me open this better, and I'll, I'll call on you to please speak. I see a question. Let me look at this. Thank you very much. I see a question from Barney Walsh here. And the question is that, Dr. Musah, I don't know if you see this, there are quite a few here. I'll read it out, but it might be helpful if you can see it. So Barney's asking, you talk about Al-Qaeda and the ISIS franchise, and as if Al-Qaeda and ISIS are somehow working together. And he's wondering, but they don't actually. He thought that these were rivals and had problematic relations. Is that not the case in the African context? And asking also about how coordinated are these franchises? How do they work together? And how are disparate groups with unique grievances having some kind of shared ideological agenda only? So Dr. Musah, I wonder if we can put that to you as we wait for other questions, please.
Thank you very much. That is a very useful question. And I would want to answer it by also asking another question. How did IS emerge? Islamic State. Okay, Islamic State emerged from Al-Qaeda based on not what they want for the future, and that is the control of the whole Arab world. That was the thing, to throw out the Kafirs who are ruling those continents. And of course, there were slight ideological, religious differences. Who is interpreting Islam better? This is one of the main causes for the split of IS from A. So you are right. In Africa, in fact, there is a war going on between, for example, Jenin and Jenin and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. going on in Mali and other places. It is for control, it is for resources. And if you look at what happened in Nigeria recently, where ISWAP was able to eliminate Shekau, who is the leader of JAS. You should also know they belong to two different, with JAS owing its allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and then, with ISWAP, also its allegiance to Islamic State. But the end result is what I am talking about here. Those two are not different in their modus operandi and in their eventual goal. In fact, there are forces within the two camps whose main purpose is to reunite the two forces. So if they cannot unite through negotiation, they have to unite through force. And a point to to emphasize that when Shekau was cornered by ISWAP, he was given two options: either to swear allegiance to the Islamic State or get destroyed. And he decided to blow himself up. So, there is a move towards reuniting these forces. And then there is also a struggle. Either we do it peacefully or we do it through force. This is what I see as the dynamics between the Islamic State franchise and then also the Al-Qaeda, franchise that we have. They are two sides of the same coin, just like twins will fight often.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Musah. I think a very valuable point there raised there, and also your illumination was very useful, very helpful. Leonide, if you want to comment to any of these points, do please indicate as well. Well, I'll call on you as well. Did you have any contributions to make at this point, Leonide?
Okay, I think the only contribution I had to make is some of these groups. It could be ISIS, it could be Akib, it could be Mujao, like we saw in Mali. They all have different agendas, and but somehow one thing that unites them is their shared enemy, what they consider as a shared enemy. It could be the state, or it could be the state and its international actors. So at least that they have like a baseline that on which they operate, even if they have different ideologies and sometimes conflict. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Leonide. To you both, of course. Now, Dr. Musah, you raised this a lot, and I think something that's on the mind of many that have worked in this space on regionalism and regionalization. And you present what is, and even in Leonide's comments, what is a problem that goes beyond borders. By its very nature, you see even that plan. It is not talking about these spaces as national spaces. Yet, we see a huge gap and challenges, and I think this is shared frustrations, in fact, around how our regional structures, peace and security architecture that is celebrated in terms of design as being something that is very unique about Africa and actually offers lessons for other parts of the world. We see it struggling here, and one point can be made around how this is a new space. In some ways it's new, in some ways it's it's not. You're talking about questions of social contracts, talk about abandonment of those in the peripheries. That is not new, that has continued, but the form that some of these challenges are taking is new. You talk about this sort of the use of digital tools and all of that, but we've seen how regional frameworks have adapted to deal with conflict in the past. You were very much, have been very much at the heart of ECOWAS and the conflict prevention framework. All of that was a response to sort of new challenges. ECOWAS is really a regional economic community. Its mandate is to deal with regional development, but actually turn that around to really center peace and security issues in a way that has been emulated by other parts, celebrated by other parts of the continent. What is it? Why can't, I'm not convinced that the AU or ECOWAS cannot adapt, unless that's what we're saying. Our continent is one that is defined by change, defined by transition. What is the point of regional organization if it cannot respond to those transitions and changes? What is holding back this opportunity. You said interesting things there about liberal democracy and how we return to self. And so that struck me. But I wonder if you can say more about this, please.
Yes. No, thank you very much. Look, Eka, this is a very pertinent point that you are raising, at this point, and it is a subject also for discussion. And it brings into question the very fundamentals of liberal democracy. Okay, when West Africa went into Liberia, Sierra Leone, right? At one point, Nigeria was spending about $1 million a day to sustain the regional intervention. ECOWAS did not go to anybody begging for resources, right? What made that possible? The three main countries that actually led that onslaught, we are talking about Nigeria, Ghana, and to some extent Guinea, okay, were ruled by military personnel who did not have to go to parliament to go and defend why they have to spend this money here and not there and all that. So there are limitations to liberal democracy that is there. That is number one. And from that liberal democracy also comes the, disempowerment of our regional organizations. Because if you look at it, all the effort the African Union has been making towards internally generated resources has not gone anywhere. In fact, the European Union is still the biggest funder of the African Union, including in places like Somalia, Amazon, and others over there. And the whole adage, he who pays the piper called the tune. So the thing is that if you cannot put the money where your mouth is, the budget that our presidents, our government used to suppress dissent in their countries is just, you just need a fraction of that actually to make sure. But the thing is that it's about misplaced priorities in our continent. The 3 battalions that the AU wanted to deploy, it is just because, one, AU does not control any regional forces or national forces. The sub-regional organizations are the ones that have got that, number one. Number two, everybody is calling on either the Security Council, the EU, and it to fund their, activities. And you should know that many of these powers have got their own interests in those countries. Why would they allow, the regional forces to go in? Okay, MINUSMA is a clear example. ECOWAS wanted to intervene. AFISMA came in briefly, and then it transformed into MINUSMA. But today, the bulk of MINUSMA is made up of regional forces, or about our forces in the region. But the thing is, the amount that the contingents will get, 7 under UN, within UN missions, is way, way, way above what regional organizations can offer them. Okay, so countries will prefer to send their troops to the UN peacekeeping mission instead of the regional, forces, because these are also dependent upon external forces to build them out. And you cannot actually ask forces that you are trying to fight actually to fund your fight. I mean, that's basically, the way I will put it. So if we don't redirect our priorities and feel that our collective security is not worth putting most of our resources into, whether the community levy, the West Africa, or a similar one that is evolving at the African Union. If we don't do it, the continent is going to be enslaved one way or the other. This is what I will say. It is about resources, it's about political will, and also how to redirect resources, that are available, to the continent, because security and development are also like two sides of the same coin. You cannot talk about development when the whole continent is, being fragilized by local external, insecurity. So you can talk about development under, those circumstances. So I think there is the need to rethink. The EU have been trying to do that, trying to say that they are going to contribute a certain percentage to peacekeeping operations. It is still very low, but still, countries are not contributing anyway. So, if you don't have the resources, you can have all the good intentions, except you want somebody to bail you out.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Musah. I think I found it interesting how you said also, because what will be told, what people will say is, well, where will those resources come from? But what you said about a fraction of what is used during the electoral democratic process, actually, to elevate certain voices, to suppress opposition, if that were redirected, this is somewhere to, so the cost actually of liberal democracy is in the way it has been practiced is a key point you make here that I think is, certainly of great value among, many of the points that you have made here. Thank you so much for that. I see here we have a couple of points, so let me try and go through them. Clement is saying, he is asking, Clement, very good to see you, Barney, everyone here, that by theorizing a system for these terrorist groups, are we not trying to force order into something that has no structure? This is quite an interesting point. Dr. Musah, what are your thoughts? Leonide as well, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, look, anybody who thinks that these terrorist groups do not have a strategy is deluding, him or herself, seriously. In fact, when Al-Qaeda began, and, actually on the African continent, if you remember, about during Clinton's time and other things, they just needed their base. They have their ideology. The trend is to create a caliphate, a caliphate, a global one. If they cannot have a global one, with its center in the Arabian Peninsula, because they do not see the royal families in these emirates and other things. And by the way, the Middle Eastern countries have also become a part and parcel of the conflict environment in in Africa. Because if you look at the way they are also projected their power in Africa, with even military bases in some countries. So this multipolarism that we are talking about, but they have a goal. Whether they will achieve it is another thing altogether. It is to create the caliphate, and they have said this severally in all their doctrines, in all their, it is one thing about whether they can actually reach that goal, right? That is the question. It's not that they don't. And today, in fact, their strategy in Africa is that, okay, let the sea be in the capital. Let's control the regions. And they have learned a lot from the organizational modus operandi of similar groups like Hamas in the occupied territories, the Algeria after the defeat of FIS, how to exert control over communities through services and other things. Look, today these groups are collecting taxes across northern Mali, in Burkina Faso. They are building their resources, and my belief is that they have this vision of creating that caliphate. Whether it will materialize depends upon the reaction from the rest of the international community. To say that they don't have a plan and that they are just there, no, it's just basic, terror attacks that we saw during the Cold War, where people wanted to cause havoc in order to draw attention to themselves or to their cause. These Islamic groups have got a long-term strategy, and they use, unlike the classical terrorist groups, they actually use carrot and sticks. And there are many communities who trust them more than their states. This is one of their, methods. Those are some of the tactics. Their operational, modalities you can question, IEDs, attacks and other things. But their tactic to actually, to capture minds and souls is very, very clear. It is about replacing the state in the periphery. Are they going to be able to expand from there? Can they use them as basis for their eventual goal? That is something we can question. But to say that they have no plan, they have no strategy, I think that would be very, very dangerous.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Musah. I think, yeah, really, really important question, but very important response to that, because I think that is something, the fact that these are just, well, not just, but scattered responses to pressure in different parts, and how that fits in with a larger agenda, how these meet is a very important subject for discussion here. Leonide, did you have any points on that as well? I'm getting quite a few fascinating comments here, so I'm looking forward to sharing these too. Yeah.
No, like Prof said, I don't think that, these terrorist groups do not have a structure or like they don't have an agenda or something. I think if you look at it critically, they're even a step ahead of the current responses. Because you'll notice that most of the responses now, international response, even response by states, we're still thinking about this crisis with the mindset of sovereign actors, But this, this is far past a sovereign issue. This is far past a sovereign issue. So I think they're even a step ahead, and then we need to be thinking through, because even the current regional responses, like the G5 Sahel that we're trying to use to combat this, you notice that at the end of the day, they still rely on national responses, but these terrorist groups are far ahead of that. So I don't think we're trying to impose structures. I think there actually exists a structure, and they are actually taking advantage, of some of these lapses, that you can find. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Leonide. In fact, as you and Dr. Musah have spoken, we think of regionalism and we think of the imbalance of power between Dr. Musah said this, the state, the region, the continent. The AU doesn't command armed forces, for instance, that comes from the state. But actually, if we look more holistically at this picture, the regional response becomes actually quite important for the nation itself, if we see this as actually moving beyond questions of sovereignty as well. So thanks so much for that. There are 2 points I'm going to try and put together because I think they're very related. So we have a question here from Sylvanus and a question from Winnie as well that I think we can engage together. So Sylvanus is asking, on the securitization of piracy on the East African coast, especially Mozambique, he's asking, is it a justified narrative or is it just fear mongering? Do these groups have capacity, and how can Rex respond to this? And Winnie is also, not Winnie, sorry, Shuvai, who has corrected me actually. Shuvai is asking that, she wants to hear more from you, Dr. Musah, and from Leonide about the extension of the caliphate to southern parts of the continent. And some of the contestations we're seeing in places like Eswatini and South Africa, are they openings actually for these extensions? So these are questions about this movement to the south. Let's start with Dr. Musah, please.
Okay, no, thank you. These are also very useful contribution to it, and I don't have ready-made, answers. But what is becoming very clear from research is that particularly in the Gulf of Guinea, maritime insecurity and then piracy and other crimes on the high seas are dovetailing into what is happening on the land. And you can see the terrorist groups, ISWAP in particular, trying to carve links with the Sahelian, jihadist groups like, the Islamic State in the greater Sahel, with the others. So those networks are ongoing. And the Gulf of Guinea has become, the hotbed of the maritime insecurity globally today. For example, they have a nuisance effect Okay, and it can be pure criminality, but as things go along, we can see linkages between maritime insecurity and insecurity on the land, and the linkages with the the transnational organized crime, routes, whether you are talking about cocaine, cigarettes, whatnot across the region. They are all very much interlinked. So these groups, I don't think they have the capacity to hold on to territory, okay, to the sea, to do it. But they are also using the same asymmetric methodology that we've talked about in the other countries. It's a hit and run, opportunistic attacks, and other things to disrupt maritime routes, routes, and then things like that. And it is going to be continuing. They may not be able, today, in fact, none of the terrorist groups in the Sahel hold territory per se. Even the Sambisa forest in Nigeria, I don't think they are able to do it, but they don't really need to. Once they are able to infiltrate into the communities, meddle there, and then try to become the alternate, state in that place, that is something that, is very dangerous. And linked to that is actually the modus operandi of these groups. And why is it that anytime a group is trying to find its feet, the terrorist subgroups, whether it is Al-Shabaab in Somalia or the Boko Haram, group in Nigeria, they all sort of declare their allegiance to one or the other of the two main branches. Okay. So there is this network, that is there, and people should not estimate it, because why you cannot destroy the terrorist groups as they are today is that their leadership structure, their organizational structure is so diffused that you can continue killing the leader, and then the networks are going to continue. So I think the international community has to devise a new means of controlling it, and it is the local communities and then the local forces who eventually will be able, to eliminate these people successfully. So if you alienate them, then you are adding to the forces that are, confronting you, and we have seen it. Not a single powerful country in the world has been able to, sort of destroy the networks of terrorist groups. And that was the quote I was making, before. If you do not defeat a terrorist organization, they consider it as a victory. Once even two people are in existence, they feel that they are still operational. But for conventional forces, okay, if you are not able to, you cannot say you've won the war, against these terrorists, even when two of them. So the concept of victory and defeat to the two forces are very different. And, I just feel that much of the interventions, whether in the maritime zone or on the land, is a combination of strategic approaches and also opportunistic attacks, to sort of replenish their armors, their resources, and other things. So it is a whole network, combination, and trying to untangle it is very, very difficult, and that is where research is also needed, in order to come up with some of these very complicated networks that we are talking about here.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Musah. Really, really fascinating response to what was actually a very interesting question there. We are on the hour. Leonide, I wonder if you have any quick comments before we try and wrap up. There are some other really fascinating questions that we'll mention as I wrap up, but perhaps you can, Prof, we can engage outside of this forum to respond to those. They're both very, very fascinating comments that I think will be important to address, even if we can't do so now. Leonide, do you have any quick comments to add to this as well, please?
No, I think Prof gave a very exhaustive response to those questions, so nothing to add.
All right. No, thank you very much for that. So I'll just mention the additional questions, so we have them sort of on file as it were. There was a really interesting point about the extent to which, I'm trying to find it, the extent to which these groups actually strategically influence how we produce knowledge about terrorism. And I really like this point because it expands our thinking about what knowledge is. So we think we're writing in books, and I mean, I hope I'm interpreting that correctly as well, David. We're writing in books, we're writing in journals, but here's a group telling a different story to other people that are being ignored about the same issue. And what does that mean? What are the implications for that? And how, a very important question, how do we do we underestimate them as scholars, as people producing how this is understood and the influence they have in that sphere? Another point that was made, so that was from Dr. David Mambari, and so also from Professor Mahmoud, a point is made about how the fortunes of peace on our continent have been tied to the presence or absence of organized violence. And as a result, the responses have been targeting drivers of violence because the focus is on stabilizing the situation without upsetting the interests of local, regional, and international powers. And rather, what kind of peace should we be pursuing in Africa beyond preparing the social contract? Which the argument here is that this is an inherited paradigm that believes the state is the main pen holder. So this is redirecting, and Professor Momo, thank you very much for that, redirecting our attentions to the question of peace, as opposed to the centering of conflict and violence and insecurity. What value would that have? And I think, Dr. Musah, some of what you've been saying about the role of society in this is a very valuable space for us to explore this conversation as well. So you will see there very powerful comments. I thought I had to read those out, and we can sort of reflect on those and respond as well. It'll be to all our benefit to do so. But with that, let me say thank you so very much, Dr. Musah, for making time out of such a busy schedule to spend this with us. This was an education. I mean, the depth, the expanse, the level of criticality, and the depth of analysis that you've offered us today, I think will go a long way in sort of expanding our thinking, even thinking about what we should be doing next, thinking about how do we respond. So you're not just laying out the problem, but you're also saying this is, giving us some direction and some guidance about how we think of engaging with some of these challenges. So thank you so much for that. Leonide, so grateful for your hugely insightful comments, bringing your own wealth of expertise on the region and on these thematic issues as well to strengthen our thinking, our reflections. I'd like that point on a reflection on sovereignty as well, challenging the way we are reflecting and thinking on all of this. Really appreciate that. Of course, to all our guests here, our attendants, we're so grateful, our participants, fascinating questions, fascinating comments that, I hope will stay with all of us as we carry on. Thank you so much for joining us, especially on Eid today as well. And as our dear director Shuvai has said here, Eid Mubarak to all. So I also echo that and say Eid Mubarak to all as well. Thank you so much. And we look forward to having you at the next one of these. Thank you and goodbye.